Welcome to the 46th episode of Speaking of Poetry. I am Rennie McQuilkin, Poet Laureate of Connecticut and Simsbury. I am delighted to present bi-monthly SCTV readings by some of the area's finest poets in conjunction with producer Ken Picard. Today I am very pleased to be joined by Jacobik, who has had a distinguished career as a university professor, critic, artist, and poet, and I'm sure much more. She has won many of the country's most prestigious poetry awards and honors, and she has been widely published in journals such as the Kenyon Review, Poetry, Ontario Review, Georgia Review, and Plowshares. Gray is a woman for all seasons, who spends much of her time these days as a visual artist working in oil, acrylic, and encaustic mediums. But she joins us today as one of the country's most distinguished poets. We are indeed fortunate that she lives so near us in Deep River. Welcome to Speaking of Poetry, Gray Jacobik.
Thank you. Thank you. I am going to read several poems, beginning with a poem called The Clarinetist. I love people who are obsessive about what they do. Being naturally obsessive myself, I'm drawn to such people. And this is such a person. The Clarinetist. On his steering wheel, he taps out Cavallini's 30 caprices, then sings phrases over the engine's drone. He strains to internalize each piece so completely, his instrument, like a phantom coin, will disappear, leaving only the ear and an abstract pattern. The very discipline that makes him great makes him obsessive and miserable. He has a long list of first dates. Perhaps his pickup line, "What's your favorite augmented sixth chord?" yields an unfortunate crop. Each beginning ends because he cannot leave well enough alone. Some days he plays fingering charts during rehearsal breaks, and not even the upbeat Biermann melodic scales and arpeggios cheer him. Sleep is a flourish of notes flapping off toward night. Friends are almost friends who don't take his music seriously enough. Not even a major orchestra will give him perfection paired with absolute control. Music without thinking of music must exist, but how achieve it? How take from the self what the self's been trained to do? Jean Verdi, Mozart, the very sound of his B-flat bass work against his longing to nail mastery down, and every note he plays seems too high, too light, never pure enough. One voice chasing two, or interrupted, transfigured, modulated, submerged only to reappear, racier, more complex. This is the rush he lives for, uncommon technical accomplishment that marries theory to performance. Untempered, his emotions stun him. There is nowhere to turn but back to the clarinet, no life apart from playing. This next poem is about a relationship in crisis, it's called Night of the Great Outpouring, a turning point in a significant relationship. He woke into weeping, as if weeping had veiled the room, and then the house. She was dead set on her affairs. No one had considered or included him. He was outside consideration. he was outside. But she was in another room, and he woke her. Sorrow, that immense, hulking cartoon shadow, had become outrage, outrage, rage. A pounding in the stairwells of his body. But he was too civilized to use fists. Their past and future were arrested. He, and then she, expelled words that, as they whacked the other, were irrevocable. Neither could turn back the force of such speaking. Hope that had once strode like a queen through their lives was now an infant thrown down a well. Still more and more. They heaped up violations, perpetrations, disappointments, betrayals large and small, until their words became transhistorical, no longer their marriage alone, but their parents' marriages, grandparents' marriages, each union that threw its shroud about their shoulders until the illimitable became limited, and words that had been two rivers of heavy water became transparent streams of air. Each wept into the emptiness of the other, into the nothing left unsaid, into the not one grievance held back. Finally, their raw and tender bodies spent, they wept into the still point that whirls like a dervish and into the manifold passageways of sleep. The power outage. Still to be done, a few last Sunday night chores. Washed clothes to be folded and put away. Trash to go out. Simple doingness, the respite of tasks. Bats are grazing fields of air. A hoot owl calls in the backwoods. Visible from an upstairs window, the cloud-caught glow of an end-of-summer carnival goes suddenly black as all else. Must be children stuck on the Ferris wheel. My palms slide down banisters to the candle drawer. Nothing to do but go to bed. The world is as dark as it ever was. Wind is awash in the music of trees. We rest in one another's arms, but there's no spark between us tonight, nothing to kindle. So I voice a memory, and you voice another, and we go back and forth like this, surveying in deep, enclosing darkness the turns circumstance and promises have given us. We seem to be drifting together, everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the old impression of eternity sneaks up, that vivid mercurial feeling of before and now and again, and yes, love you, and yes, love me, somewhere forever, we're sure of it. Or perhaps this is only human, unable as we are to imagine not being or an end to our love. The sense of a saving, needed haven when light has failed and we're in the dark. One of the things I like to write about is poetry itself, and in particular, the stuff that poems are made of. Words, sentences, paragraphs, metaphors. And I would say a significant portion of the body of my work, maybe 8-10%, tends to be about language itself in one form or another. And so I want to read a few of those poems. This is called Neologisms, which means literally new words or new constructions of words. and I love to invent words and think about words, and words we don't yet have that we need, or we might have, or that other languages have that we wish English had. Or when we use the phrase, there should be a word for that. There ought to be a word for that. We're looking to create a neologism. No word is yet in English for nature out of balance. Any flawed detail that creates an elegant whole. The last fish in a kettle. Compulsive cleaning, making the familiar seem perverse. No word for two crows picking over carrion as a third stands watch. I wish there were a word for each person's path in life and the means by which one discovers it. A word that catches the quality of what moves between us and how it sidetracks me. A word for irrepressible desires, for two contrails fading into a cross. What of idle talk that reveals profound truths only sensitive souls can discern? We need a word for that. A dismal bore who buttonholes people and tells miserable tales. Now that's a word, buttonholes. Reminds me of cotton, as in, Jeb, I don't much cotton to what you're fixin' to do. A word for dislike that's got some teeth to it. A word for the politically astute, and another for those who find politics tiresome. A misguided pilgrim. Potentially dangerous, unredeemable statements. An improvement that makes matters worse. Only that word, should we find it, would devolve to cover many bureaucratic actions. Coin a new phrase and ipso facto it becomes de facto, whatever the opposite of a neologism is. Another word we don't have, slang or cliche, it's a rain-soaked slope downward to a word's oblivion. Beloved, this gentleness that's going to end when we end needs a word, a true name, lest it become a missing the world won't miss, a quality vanished, a blessing lost. This is called Former Lovers. We say the cast-off hours because once ships set sail at early dawn. And it's then I sometimes dream of former lovers. They've aged in these new visions, as I have. We wake with sagging this or that's with thin and silvered hair. Once, at 23, staring into a mirror, I saw my face transmorgify as decades passed into deepening creases and wrinkles, skin and soft muscles slackening around my clear green eyes. Then finally, they too grew pale and dim. My youth became my dotage, the skeleton each hour excavates with the dust-soft brush of the archaeologist. In these dream encounters, my former lovers and I make love with a greater deliberateness than I recall we knew, as though, through some prescience, the future carried to the past a gift of sensation held entirely in the mind. So surprising these dear others progressing with me, as if all along taking someone into your body meant exactly that, the gravity of existence bearing down on us, no one separate as we had supposed, no one ever walking away. And this poem is sort of continues that theme of former lovers, in this case, a former husband, and it's called the X, the EX. in the placable air of long dissolved discord. We wait with our daughter, days overdue, our single shared goodness. She carries our first grandchild. In 30 years, not a word has tiptoed across the continent between us. We've led vastly different lives. He's not unkind, only holds a dizzying number of opinions. Like bombarding mosquitoes, they fly in and out of range. Across my face, I draw a tight mask of passive acquiescence. The skeleton underneath threatens to grin, but he's the one who's dying of AIDS and its complications, the effeminate, virginal boy I married when I was 22. Can anything be said to those we betrayed and abandoned? Neither of us knew ourselves. Each feared we'd be destroyed by the other's needs. That fear seems exorbitant from here and pointless. Yet I remember staggering about for weeks, feeling as though a beast were daily ripping the sternum out of my chest. We shred our nerves against the grate of one another's youthful insecurities. Weak, slight, vulnerable, only his voice is unchanged. I must have loved its sound once. Maybe, strangely, in the unreckonable realms of human life, our daughter's and her child's, whomever we marry is ours forever. And in some sense, he is mine, and I almost want him, but only out of pity or forgotten guilt. All the dross that had to go was long since skimmed off. Here we are, his once wife, my once husband, the child we made who is with child, this summer's evening's sterling light, and the mystery, how each moment goes on and holds us present until the last. Sometimes I look back at the body of my work and it surprises me. I see a theme that I hadn't recognized was a theme that I was obsessed with and wrote about over and over again. And I realized recently that I have a significant number of poems that are all about something mysterious, something I can't put my finger on. And the poem is an attempt to come up with what that mysterious something is. And so I'm now thinking of these poems as being about mystery. This is called The Encounter. Two empty picnic tables leaning into a weathered collapse, and beyond, 3 types of conifer, a polish of pollen over the maple hills. It was here, near the lake. Her hands rippled over me as if they were searching below the lake's surface for a slipped ring. I can still feel them. Perhaps she was a daemon who used me for her meretricious pleasure, trying to make music in some unintelligible manner, swishing the silver blades of her psyche the way Shostakovich has sound diced the air. A daemon with storm clouds for breasts, an island on her belly. She said my eyes were desire's theater, my thighs pastures for the beasts of light. I laughed. To think there are still designs to be garnered from a woman's back. Here is the banquet of body, she said, come to consume you. Then she stood up and turning away said, only a goddess can follow me, a slow-walking, skirt-flowing mountain of a woman whose ovaries feed eggs to the void. For I am tableau and tapestry, stitched with the fine strictures of art. A little poem about the making of poems. It's called Like a Bricklayer. Like a bricklayer who climbs the scaffold holding a loaded hod and hawk, each poet mounts to the platform where language is perpetually extending. Then, between the lines and pens, the poet trowels the cradling mortar of syntax, settles each brick, checks with the spirit level, and, when balanced, descends. Another poem about words. These are about compound words that have a hyphen between them, compound nouns. They're called word birds. Word birds. Most likely it was the Jabberwocky's acquaintances first stirred my affection for rhyming compounds, the tum-tum and the jub-jub, although it may have been the bear, Fuzzy Wuzzy, taught my tongue their savory flavor, or Hurley and Burley, the names Honey Bun and South Pacific gave each coconut breasts. Perhaps hoi polloi with its classical ring, a favorite locution of my father's, hooked me. And later, that itsy-bitsy, teeny-weeny, it's the echolalia, the la-di-da of such combos I'm a canoodle-poodle for. Hoity-toity, topsy-turvy, roly-poly. Plus these congeries are efficient and often onomatopoetical. Hanky-panky, fiddle-faddle, hustle-bustle. Sound plays transcendent hurdy-gurdy that's protracted time by going faster, a magician's hocus-pocus, a witch doctor's mumbo-jumbo. I could go on willy-nilly, niddle-noddling lines, stumbling off higgledy-piggledy. And I'll conclude with this one. I live on the Connecticut River, and this is a poem called What to Do with a River. In summer, all day long and sometimes into the night, the noise of those sousing themselves on nautical pleasures, captains of leisure craft and their guests, ricochet off the river. Hulls slap against wakes, then galumph over them. Quieter the wavering and scissoring sails of the sailboats, the bright kayaks that add a silver slit to seams of light. Quieter still, the austere seasons of small laps against the river's banks. Then, bell clear, I hear gull caws bounce off ice. Yesterday, the river and sky seemed to be a wash of ink on rice paper, a wash lifted here and there with a dab of cotton. Then there's that week when the sealed river breaks, rumbles, groans like an old horse lifting itself up from cold ground. I've heard ice chunks clank and knock as if an anchor struck and kept striking iron. I go down to the river to pray, not to pray, to consider impermanence, variability, temperament, color in itself, to lose myself in the river's rhythms, let its moods penetrate, note the floating wood, the herons, geese, gull. I think I could drown here, could rock up the pockets of my old wool coat and, why not? A few moments of rugged resolve trump the eked out erasures of assisted living, pain, dementia, nursing home. I have my eye on a path or two, spots to slip through unseen, to wade in till I stumble, and behold, the current takes.
Gray, what a gorgeous reading. I
Thank
am
you.
glad you are like a perfectionist bricklayer, laying each brick of a word carefully, checking it with your spirit level, because the words come out so beautifully, rolling off your tongue, with humor and with lyricism. I'm thinking of that wonderful phrase you end one poem with your willy-nilly lines stumbling off higgledy-piggledy when you're playing on all the opposites. And your passion for les mots justes is just an absolute delight.
Thank you.
Yeah, even when you can't find it in the poem about neologisms, what is the word for a terrible bore who buttonholes us with his insistence? You know, we need that word, and you probably are going to send us all off to our inner dictionaries creating these words. I think you're involving us in the poem, because we're going to create those words when you tell us that we have the need for them. I made a little collection of a few phrases I especially enjoyed, but I could go on probably far too long reiterating them. But one was you referred to the wind being awash in the music of trees. Must be onto trees here, because I also like the one in which you refer to a polish of pollen over the maple hills. It's those wonderful repetitions of consonant sounds, a polish of pollen over the maple hills. And then the images, my goodness. One I remember in particular is time being like an archaeologist brushing off the dust from our skeletons. Or was it your skeleton? Mm-hmm. In any case, that image just is very haunting. And the moments you create, the moments that we all know but we hadn't really focused on until we heard you focus on them so brilliantly, or so wittily, or so lyrically, or so fully.
Thank you. Thank you.
That wonderful poem about the power outage, in which you remind us how it is to have the power go off, and how that creates a separate peace in our lives, when the lights go black, our inner lights go on, and you put it so beautifully. So thank you for that gorgeous reading.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I want to also thank Karen Handville, the enormously talented station manager of SCTV, and Ken Picard, who produces and edits this show. If you would like to learn more about Gray Jacobik's poetry, please visit her website, grayjacobik.com, and to learn more about her artwork, which is as gorgeous as her words, visit grayjacobikartist.com. Goodbye until we meet again for the 47th installment of Speaking of Poetry.